If you're watching this right now, I hope you're not alone. I hope you're not in a dark room, with the lights off, headphones in, and the world outside your window silent and still. Because tonight I'm going to share 3 true stories that will make you question every sound you hear, every shadow you see, and every time you think you're safe. These aren't just stories, they're warnings. And after you hear them, you might never look at your own home, your own neighborhood, or even your own friends the same way again. Let's start with the first story. It's about a girl named Emily, who thought she was just having a normal night at home. She was 16, living in a quiet suburb where nothing ever seemed to happen. Her parents were out for the evening, and she was left in charge of her little brother, Max, who was 8. Emily was used to babysitting him, and honestly, she didn't mind. She'd order pizza, let him watch cartoons a little later than usual, and then tuck him into bed before settling in for a night of texting her friends and scrolling through social media. That night, everything felt normal. The pizza arrived right on time, delivered by the same teenage guy who always brought their order. Emily paid, tipped him, and closed the door, not thinking twice about it. She and Max ate in the living room, laughing at the silly show he picked, and for a while, it felt like any other Friday night. Around 9, she sent Max upstairs to brush his teeth and get ready for bed. She followed a few minutes later, tucking him in and promising to check on him before she went to sleep. Downstairs, Emily curled up on the couch, phone in hand, half watching a movie and half chatting with her friends. The house was quiet, except for the occasional creak of the old floorboards and the hum of the refrigerator. She didn't notice anything strange until she heard a soft tapping at the back door. At first, she thought it was just the wind, maybe a branch brushing against the glass. But the tapping came again, more deliberate this time. 3 slow, steady knocks. Emily froze. She glanced at the clock, 10:17 p.m. Her parents weren't due back for another hour. She muted the TV and listened. The house was silent, except for her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She crept to the kitchen, careful not to make a sound, and peeked through the window above the sink. The backyard was dark, the porch light casting long shadows across the grass. She couldn't see anyone. The tapping came again, louder now. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She reached for her phone, ready to call her parents, but stopped herself. She didn't want to overreact. Maybe it was just a neighbor or a stray cat. She tiptoed to the back door and looked through the peephole. Nothing, just darkness. She was about to turn away when she heard it, a whisper so soft she almost missed it. Emily, her name spoken from the other side of the door. She stumbled back, heart racing. She didn't recognize the voice. It was low, almost a growl, and it sent chills down her spine. She ran to the living room, locked the front door, and checked all the windows. Everything was secure. She grabbed a kitchen knife just in case and hurried upstairs to check on Max. He was sound asleep, oblivious to the fear gripping his sister. Emily sat on the edge of his bed, listening for any sign that the stranger was still outside. Minutes passed, then half an hour. Nothing. She started to relax, convincing herself it was just her imagination. Maybe she'd heard the wind or a distant voice from the street. At 11:05, her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Let me in, Emily." She stared at the screen, her hands shaking. She didn't reply. Another message came through. "I know you're awake." She blocked the number, heart pounding, and called her parents. They answered immediately, promising to come home right away. Emily locked herself in Max's room, clutching the knife, and waited. She heard footsteps on the porch, slow and heavy. The doorbell rang once, twice, 3 times. Then silence. Emily didn't move. She barely breathed. She heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Her parents finally home. She ran downstairs, tears streaming down her face, and threw herself into their arms. They searched the house and the yard, but found nothing. No footprints, no sign that anyone had been there. The police came, took a report, and told Emily it was probably just a prank, but she knew better. She never found out who sent those messages or how they knew her name. But for weeks after, she slept with the lights on, jumping at every sound, every shadow. And she never ever stayed home alone again. That's just the first story. If you're already feeling uneasy, you might want to pause here, check your locks, and make sure you're really alone. 'Cause the next story is even darker. And it happened to someone who thought they were safe in the one place you're supposed to be able to let your guard down, your own bedroom. The second story belongs to a guy named Marcus. He was a college sophomore, living in a small off-campus apartment with his best friend, Tyler. The building was old, the kind of place where the walls were thin and the pipes rattled at night. But it was cheap and close to campus, so they made it work. Marcus was the kind of person who never really believed in scary stories. He'd laugh at horror movies, roll his eyes at ghost stories, and always said that real life was never as creepy as people made it out to be. That was before the night he woke up to find someone standing at the foot of his bed. It was a Thursday, in late October, the kind of night when the air is just starting to turn cold and the wind rattles the windows. Tyler was out with friends, and Marcus had the place to himself. He stayed up late, working on a paper, then watched a few episodes of his favorite show before finally crawling into bed around 2 a.m. He fell asleep almost instantly, exhausted from a long week of classes and work. He didn't know what woke him up. Maybe it was a sound, or maybe it was just that strange feeling you get when you know something isn't right. He opened his eyes and stared into the darkness, trying to figure out what had pulled him from sleep. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then he saw it, a shadow darker than the rest of the room, standing at the foot of his bed. At first, Marcus thought he was dreaming. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, but the figure didn't move. It was tall, thin, and completely still. He couldn't make out any features, just the outline of a person. His heart started to race. He tried to convince himself it was just a trick of the light, maybe a coat hanging on the back of his door. But he knew every inch of his room, and there was nothing there that could cast a shadow like that. He reached for his phone, but it wasn't on the nightstand where he always left it. He glanced around, trying not to take his eyes off the figure, but his phone was nowhere in sight. That's when the figure moved. It took a single step closer to the bed, and Marcus felt a wave of cold air wash over him. He wanted to scream, to jump out of bed and run, but he was frozen, paralyzed by fear. The figure leaned forward, and Marcus could finally see its face, or rather, the lack of one. It was just a blank, featureless void, darker than the rest of the room. He squeezed his eyes shut, telling himself it wasn't real, that he was just having a nightmare. When he opened them again, the figure was gone. Marcus lay in bed, shaking for what felt like hours. He finally worked up the courage to get up and turn on the light. The room was empty. He found his phone on the floor, halfway under the bed, even though he was sure he'd left it on the nightstand. He checked the time, 3:07 a.m. He didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, Marcus tried to laugh it off. He told Tyler about the nightmare, but his friend just shrugged and said the building was probably haunted. They joked about it, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He started sleeping with the lights on, locking his bedroom door every night, even though he knew it wouldn't really keep anything out. A few nights later, it happened again. Marcus woke up at exactly 3:07 a.m., heart pounding, and saw the same shadowy figure standing at the foot of his bed. This time it didn't move. It just stood there watching him. Marcus tried to scream, but no sound came out. He felt like he was suffocating, like the air had been sucked out of the room. The figure leaned closer, and Marcus could feel its cold breath on his face. He closed his eyes, praying it would go away. When he opened them, the figure was gone, but the room felt colder than ever. He checked the time, 3:08 a.m. He didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Marcus started to unravel. He stopped going out at night, stopped inviting friends over. He barely slept, terrified of what he might see if he closed his eyes. Tyler noticed the change, but Marcus couldn't bring himself to explain what was really happening. He started researching sleep paralysis, convinced that was the answer. But nothing he read matched what he was experiencing. The figure wasn't just a hallucination. It felt real, solid, like it could reach out and touch him at any moment. One night, Tyler decided to stay up with Marcus, just to prove there was nothing to be afraid of. They watched movies, played video games, and joked about the bedroom ghost. Around 2:30 a.m., Tyler fell asleep on the couch and Marcus went to his room, determined to get at least a few hours of rest. He locked the door, turned on the lamp, and crawled into bed. At 3:07 a.m., Marcus woke up to the sound of someone whispering his name. He sat up, heart racing. and saw the shadowy figure standing in the corner of the room. This time it wasn't alone. There was another figure, smaller, crouched by the window. Marcus tried to scream, but his voice caught in his throat. The figures moved closer, their faces still blank, their bodies impossibly dark. He closed his eyes, praying for morning. When he opened them, the room was empty, but the feeling of dread lingered. Marcus never saw the figures again, but he never slept in that room after that night. He moved out a week later, and to this day he refuses to talk about what happened. But sometimes late at night, he still wakes up at exactly 3:07 a.m., heart pounding, certain that something is watching him from the shadows. The third story is about a group of friends who thought a weekend getaway would be the perfect escape from the stress of their everyday lives. They were all in their early 20s, recent college graduates and eager to make the most of their newfound freedom before the realities of adulthood set in. There were 5 of them: Rachel the planner, Ben the skeptic, Lisa the storyteller, Mark the quiet one, and Jamie the joker. They'd been friends since high school, and this trip was supposed to be a celebration of their friendship, a chance to reconnect, reminisce, and make new memories. Rachel found a cabin online, tucked away in the woods about 2 hours from the city. It was cheap, secluded, and had just enough rustic charm to make it feel like an adventure. The listing promised hiking trails, a lake for swimming, and a fire pit for late-night stories. It sounded perfect. They packed their bags, loaded up the car, and set off on a Friday afternoon, laughing and singing along to their favorite songs as the city faded into the distance. The drive was uneventful until they turned off the main road and onto a narrow, winding path that seemed to stretch on forever. The trees grew thicker, the sky darker, and the sense of isolation more intense with every mile. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the clearing. The cabin itself was smaller than they expected, with peeling paint and creaky steps, but they shrugged it off. It was only for the weekend, after all. They spent the first night around the fire, roasting marshmallows and telling ghost stories. Lisa, always the dramatic one, insisted on sharing the legend of the Watcher in the Woods, a local tale about a mysterious figure who watched from the trees, waiting for the right moment to strike. Ben rolled his eyes, but the others listened, shivering as the wind rustled the branches overhead. When the fire died down, they retreated inside, locking the doors and windows more out of habit than fear. The first strange thing happened the next morning. Rachel woke up early to make coffee and found muddy footprints on the porch, bare footprints too large to belong to any of them. She called the others outside, and they all stared at the prints, trying to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe a hiker had gotten lost or an animal had wandered too close. Ben joked that it was the Watcher, but no one laughed. They tried to shake it off, spending the day hiking and swimming in the lake. But the sense of unease lingered. Every so often, one of them would glance at the tree line, certain they saw movement just beyond the shadows. Mark, usually the quietest, admitted he felt like they were being watched. The others teased him, but their laughter was forced. That night, as they sat around the fire, they heard something moving in the woods. At first, it was just the crack of a branch, the rustle of leaves. But then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the clearing. The friends fell silent, listening as the footsteps grew closer, then stopped. Ben, trying to be brave, called out, "Who's there?" There was no answer, just the sound of something breathing in the darkness. They hurried inside, locking the door behind them. The cabin felt smaller, the walls closing in as the wind howled outside. They tried to distract themselves with games and music, but every sound made them jump. Around midnight, the power went out, plunging the cabin into darkness. Rachel fumbled for her phone, using the flashlight to find candles. The others huddled together, whispering about what could have caused the outage. Suddenly, there was a loud bang on the front door. The friends froze, staring at each other in terror. Another bang, harder this time, rattled the windows. Lisa started to cry, and Jamie tried to comfort her, but his voice shook with fear. Ben grabbed a fireplace poker, holding it like a weapon. The banging stopped, replaced by the sound of footsteps circling the cabin, slow and methodical. They waited, barely breathing, as the footsteps moved from window to window. Shadows flickered across the curtains, and for a moment Rachel thought she saw a face pressed against the glass. pale with wide, staring eyes. She screamed, and the others rushed to her side, but when they looked, the face was gone. The rest of the night passed in a blur of fear and exhaustion. The friends took turns keeping watch, jumping at every sound. When the sun finally rose, they ventured outside, finding more muddy footprints, this time circling the entire cabin. They packed their things in silence, too scared to stay another night. As they drove away, Rachel glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a figure standing at the edge of the woods, watching them leave. She didn't say anything, not wanting to scare the others, but she knew they'd all seen it. No one spoke until they were back on the main road, the cabin and the woods fading into the distance. They never talked about what happened that weekend, not really. They told their families it was just a bad trip, that the cabin was too creepy, the woods too dark. But sometimes, late at night, Rachel dreams of the Watcher, standing in the shadows waiting for her to come back. If you've made it this far, you're probably feeling that familiar chill crawling up your spine, the one that makes you want to check over your shoulder or turn on every light in the house. But before you go, there's something important to remember about these stories. They aren't just tales to scare you for a night. They're reminders that sometimes the scariest things aren't the monsters under the bed or the ghosts in the attic. Sometimes it's the people we pass on the street, the strangers who knock on our doors, or the shadows that linger just out of sight. What ties these three stories together isn't just fear. It's the way ordinary moments can turn into nightmares in the blink of an eye. Emily was just a teenager, doing what millions of kids do every weekend, babysitting, eating pizza, scrolling through her phone. She never expected that a simple knock at the door could shatter her sense of safety forever. The texts, the voice whispering her name, the feeling of being watched, those are the kinds of things that stay with you, long after the police have left and the house is quiet again. For Emily, the real horror wasn't just the stranger outside, but the realization that someone out there knew her name, her habits, and exactly when she'd be alone. Marcus's story is different, but just as haunting. He was a skeptic, someone who thought he was immune to fear, until the night he woke up to find a faceless figure standing at the foot of his bed. Whether it was a ghost, a hallucination, or something else entirely, it didn't matter. What mattered was the way it made him feel, helpless, vulnerable, and utterly alone. The fact that the figure returned, always at the same time, always watching, turned his bedroom from a place of rest into a prison of dread. Even after he moved out, the fear followed him, a reminder that some things can't be explained or escaped. And then there's the group of friends, whose weekend getaway turned into a waking nightmare. They thought they were safe, surrounded by people they trusted, far from the dangers of the city. But the woods have a way of hiding things, of making you feel small and exposed. The muddy footprints, the banging on the door, the face at the window, those are the details that stick in your mind, the ones you replay over and over, trying to make sense of what happened. For Rachel and her friends, the scariest part wasn't just the Watcher in the woods, but the knowledge that they were never really alone, even in the middle of nowhere. What makes these stories so terrifying isn't just the events themselves, but the way they force us to confront our own vulnerability. We like to think we're in control, that we can protect ourselves with locks, alarms, and common sense. But sometimes all it takes is a single moment, a knock at the door, a shadow in the corner, a face in the window, to remind us how fragile that sense of security really is. Maybe you're thinking, that could never happen to me. Maybe you're double-checking your locks right now, or telling yourself that these are just stories, exaggerated for effect. But the truth is, every one of these stories happened to someone who thought the same thing. They were just living their lives, going through the motions, until something or someone decided to make them the main character in a horror story. So what can you do? Maybe nothing. Maybe the best you can do is stay alert, trust your instincts, and remember that sometimes it's better to be a little paranoid than a little too trusting. If you hear a knock at the door late at night, if you see something out of place, if you get a text from an unknown number, don't ignore it. Don't assume it's nothing, because sometimes the scariest stories start with the smallest details. As you turn off this video and try to go about your night, You might find yourself listening a little more closely to the sounds around you. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the wind rattling the windows. Suddenly, they all seem a little more sinister. Maybe you'll check the locks one more time, or leave a light on in the hallway, just in case. And if you find yourself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying these stories in your mind, remember, you're not alone. There are thousands of people out there, just like you, who have felt that same fear, that same sense of unease. But maybe that's the real comfort. Because as scary as these stories are, they remind us that we're all human, all vulnerable, all searching for a little bit of safety in a world that can be unpredictable and cruel. And sometimes the best thing we can do is share our stories, warn each other, and hope that by shining a light on the darkness, we can keep the monsters at bay, if only for one more night. So, if you're still awake, still listening, and still feeling that chill in the air, just remember, the world is full of stories like these. Some are told, some are kept secret, and some are still waiting to happen. Sleep tight if you can.